So again, and thank you very much to CSEB and to T for organizing this. It's really great to have the opportunity to speak with everyone. So just to give you a sense, just first of all, we want to get a sense of who's in the room. So there's a poll that you can see here which asks, what is your position, function, or role? And let us know who you are. Are you a student, academic researcher, non-academic researcher, policy analyst, or others? So please take a minute to vote in the poll just so that we know who you are and so that you can get to know each other. Can everyone hear me again? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so so the overview for the presentation is we're first just going to give a little bit, set a little bit of context. What's the reason why you should write a blog or an op-ed, and what can they do? And so just going to set the stage a little bit, give you an overview of the healthcare blogging landscape, tell you a little bit about healthydebate.ca, and then we'll get into the workshop aspect of it, which is what Jeremy will lead, which is some key rules of thumb for writing a healthcare op-ed or blog, and he'll give an overview of some examples of the good and the bad, and then we'll have lots of time, hopefully, for questions and discussion. So just going to pause for a minute. I'm seeing about half of the people on the line are students, a quarter academic researchers, 7% are non-academic researchers, 3% policy analysts, and 17% others. So thanks very much, everyone, for that. So why write an op-ed or blog? And I should also say before I get started that you'll see there's references at the bottom of some slides where you can look for more information. I've also hyperlinked many of the web references as well as the websites throughout the slides, so you can go back to the slides that were emailed to you earlier if you want to get more to look up those references. So why write an op-ed? You write an op-ed because you have something to say. You want a platform. There's your bullhorn right there, and it's a great way to get your work out, to raise awareness, for advocacy work. Sorry about that. And to myth bust, to really just a place to use your voice and to exercise your opportunity to get your work out there. So I think there's three different things that op-eds and blogs can do, particularly for researchers and academics. And there's a really interesting, very actually vibrant discussion going on in the research literature about blogging for academics. So I've hyperlinked those last two hyperlinks, so to some papers and blogs that talk about that. But in particular in healthcare, there's quite a big focus on knowledge translation and really shortening the journey from the evidence that we work on and generate to its effect, to it reaching the public, to it reaching policymakers, and to it actually having an impact. And that's what I'm really going to focus the kind of context section of this presentation on. I mean, talking to your colleagues, developing a community, and developing a network is something as well that we'll allude to. And also, sometimes, these kind of communities of colleagues tend to be listened to as well by other influencers, such as journalists, who can pick that up and then really translate that out to the public. So in terms of members of the public, what we're seeing is that, there's just an explosion of people going online who are looking for really good information about healthcare, and they're looking for evidence. They're trying to understand what's happening, and it's not always, how do I lose weight, or a question about a specific symptom that they're having, but some of it's really a little bit deeper than that, right? Trying to understand medical test results, questions about caregiving, reducing healthcare costs. This is American information, but it's a really broad spectrum of people who are going online and asking Dr. Google for all kinds of questions. A really interesting statistic that I thought that I found. So out of the 75% of American adult internet users who ask questions about healthcare, about a quarter of them will hit a paywall. So that means that they're going to find a peer-reviewed journal publication that they cannot access, and about 83% of them will go elsewhere, 13% will give up, and 2% pay. So, I mean, really, there's, people are searching for evidence-based information if they're hitting paywalls. And blogs are a way, blogs tend to be very open source, so they're, there's not going to be a paywall on a blog, and blogs tend to be a great way to get out into the social web. And we also know from some of the data presented here that a lot of people are really going online, and there's great communities of peer-to-peer healthcare where people are seeking out other patients and other people who are experiencing similar symptoms to them to ask questions, to share information, and they're doing that through their social networks, so through things like Facebook, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Twitter, things like that. So you can access all those statistics there. And plus, I mean, this is somewhat of a the scare tactic side of things, but if us as researchers aren't online putting forth evidence-based information, this can be an evidence-free zone. Two examples of that are, of course, the anti-vaccine movement, which has a huge reach online. I didn't hyperlink to that website, but you can certainly go and look at it if you wish, vaccinetruth.com. And of course, the Canadian case of CSEB and MS was a huge online movement. I hyperlinked to a paper that I wrote with some colleagues about the way that the online, web space was used as a real platform for advocates of CSEB to reach out to the public. And in many ways, our paper talks about how the experts in this area weren't in that online space, and the advocates were able to access government decision makers to really have a huge influence on the media, and they really used the web as their platform. So if we're not online, often non-evidence-based information is. So, but of course, I mean, I think because the social web is this wild west, right? Is this space where non-evidence-based information has been shared and can be shared so quickly, it makes us quite uncomfortable as researchers and as people in healthcare, epidemiology, and our values tend to be, we're risk adverse. We protect our data. We rely on experts for information. Our data is restricted. It's private. Before we release anything publicly, we're going through peer review. And, we believe in authorship and intellectual property. That is just not happening on the web. On the web and in social media, things are happening so quickly. There's a lot of risk-taking. Information is social. It takes on a life of its own. It's quickly shared and disseminated very broadly. Open access is the name of the game. Everything is open. Nothing is restricted. Dissemination is rapid, and there's the intellectual commons. So think about Wikipedia, for example. People are, an online encyclopedia where what you write and your entries can be completely open and edited and revised by anyone who's who's accessing that. So a lot more openness than what we're used to in healthcare. So this can make us a little bit uncomfortable, but what I'm hoping to do in the next set of slides is give you a couple examples of spaces and different blogs and platforms where people within healthcare, within epidemiology, within public health are using these platforms to really share their voice, to express their point of views, to advocate for the things that matter to them, and to do it in a space that makes them feel comfortable, and to hopefully, depending on the kind of platform that they use, do that KT work that we all think is really important, and to reach out to the public, and often, to reach out to their colleagues and to the broader community. So the next couple of slides will just be an overview of the landscape and of some of the different opportunities to use this, to use the web to share your opinion. So the first type is the individually generated blog. Now, the two blogs that I've linked to are just some fun blogs that I really enjoy. The first one is Weighty Matters. That's a logo for it there, and it's written by an obesity physician in Ottawa, Yoni Friedhoff. The second blog is called Pop Health, and it's a fun blog written by a health communications expert in the States. And it examines the intersection of public health and pop culture. So she's talking about celebrities, for example, Angelina Jolie and her highly publicized breast cancer was written on there, and it's just a place for her to explore some of these ideas and interests. And I mean, starting your own blog is certainly one option. It's great to have your own space online. It's great if you have a lot to say, but if you don't consistently update it, it's going to look pretty stale. So that's definitely a consideration. If you're interested in blogging, sure, starting your own blog is a great way to do it, but you need to be, very diligent about updating it. And just as an example, as part of the, my personal research for putting together this webinar, I looked at a list. It was 2012, top 25 public health blogs, and only 2 of them were current. So I mean, it's a lot of work to update a personal blog, but it can be a really incredible platform. And someone like Yoni Friedhoff, he's recently promoting a book that he's written. He's on the radio. He's on Twitter. He's quite LinkedIn, and this blog is his home base for really his advocacy work and his voice online. Then something that some of us in healthcare and in public health may be more familiar with is really more of a community-generated blog. So it's a group of experts. They have a really clear focus. They have, a mission, and they're using a blog or a website to really gather their opinions and contribute to it, and to have a really focused space for conversation. So impact ethics is from a research group of a group of bioethicists led out of Dalhousie in Halifax. Sorry that this window keeps popping up on my screen. Oh. And so they're in Dalhousie, and they talk about bioethics, and they have posts from different members of their research group. So a nice space for them, more of a collegial space. The next two links are science-based medicine, which is a group of different physicians, clinicians, researchers that really try to myth bust and really focus on the evidence in evidence-based medicine and health, and that's a contributor model again, where these are individuals who are selected and invited and have this as their platform. The last one is The Incidental Economist, a really influential voice on healthcare reform in the U.S., and it was started by a policy analyst, I think, at Kaiser Permanente in the United States. And again, really a platform that was initially started by insiders, people who are really interested in research, but now has a much wider reach, and is certainly, I know, is a great source for many journalists on healthcare, but again, a contributor model from a group of people who are historically from research. So the next group is organizationally generated blogs. I mean, certainly individuals and researchers aren't the only people who want to get in on the web and who want to capitalize on this. So a lot of different organizations now have a blog section to their site. I mean, there's huge benefits in terms of contributing to these types of blogs because you already have an established name associated with it. PLOS Medicine is a great example, the PLOS family of journals. They have a terrific group of blogs that they've really fostered on their sites, and you can check out blogs.plos.org to see a full list. But these are the Citizen Sci blog and the Public Health Perspectives blog are two blogs that I thought this particular audience would be interested in. And of course, the benefit of publishing there is that you have an affiliation with a really trusted brand organization. There is editorial oversight and really, really high-quality content. The Health Affairs blog, a U.S. journal of healthcare policy, is another example of a contributor-based model of a blog that is affiliated with a journal. And again, there they have, an insider type of audience, but a platform that's affiliated with Health Affairs. So certainly getting all of the prestige associated with that journal. And the final group is a really kind of, I would call them aggregators in a way. They're websites that have tons of content, lots of hits, high volume, and a much more public audience than the previous three kind of families of blogs and websites. So the first one is kevinmd.com. That was started by a U.S. physician. He posts. He has a contributor-based model from across. I think it's maybe global. I mean, certainly a focus on the U.S., but has physicians and healthcare and clinicians contributing, and just a really, really high volume. These tend to be very short posts, not at all, targeted towards a researcher audience, targeted towards a very public audience. Of course, all of you will be familiar with the Huffington Post, and the Huffington Post, of course, has a section where they have news writers, but they also do have a featured blog section where they accept blogs from anyone on very eclectic range of topics, and that's just a massive platform for a blog. And they tend to accept content that would be a little bit different, of course, than a researcher-generated blog. So, something that's much more timely, that's much more relevant to what's happening in the news. Same with iPolitics. These are really focused on current events, what's happening now, and and getting opinions from trusted people, but getting those opinions on things that are happening in the news. So as you can see, I mean, there's a lot of different places where your blog or where your op-ed can go, and it's a matter of targeting the content really to the platform. So if you're going to be writing about something that's quite current and in the news, I would definitely consider the Huffington Post or Kevin MD or iPolitics, something that can really get your work out there. If you're going to be writing about something that is certainly of interest to a small community of peers, then there's also some really great options for you as well. And if you just have a lot to say, you can always start your own blog. So then now I want to tell you a little bit about Healthy Debate, and this is where Jeremy and I work full time, and this is a project that that Dr. Andreas Lapakis founded here at St. Michael's Hospital about 3 years ago, and this was essentially part of the research family where it was a knowledge translation project that came out of some work that he'd done around engaging members of the public in a more informed conversation about healthcare policy. And so you can see here from this infographic, the idea is really, members of the public care about healthcare. They want to improve the system. They have opinions. They want good evidence-based information, but they don't have a really good source for that. So we felt that Healthy Debate was really filling in a gap here where people were able to get unbiased information, could really engage in a community of people who were interested in similar things, make sense of a media that tended to be quite bifurcated and not always unbiased and not always focused on the evidence, and also where members of the public could really suggest topics that they wanted to learn more about, so to make it very interactive, and that's the platform that Healthy Debate tries to provide. And the goal of this is to really empower the public to make them better consumers of healthcare, and also, they're obviously a huge important stakeholder of the healthcare system, so make them a much more knowledgeable stakeholder of the healthcare system and ultimately improve the healthcare system. So that has translated into Healthy Debate. This is a screenshot from a couple of days ago. If you go on your browser and type in healthydebate.ca, you'll see a slightly different picture because we've introduced some new content, including a podcast just today. But this gives you a sense of healthydebate.ca. So we have a weekly feature article that's written by one of our staff writers, as well as and overseen by 2 members of our editorial group. And then below the articles, we have an opinion section, and that's an entirely open contributor model where anyone can submit a blog to us, and that's where Jeremy will be focusing the second piece of his presentation. Jeremy's the editor of the opinion section of Healthy Debate, and he'll be telling you a little bit about some of the blogs that we've published and some rules of thumb around how to publish these blogs. But I'll just quickly go over some of the criteria of what we do look for in blogs. And our idea in launching the opinion section was really to have a place for people to read what the experts have to say, but the experts don't necessarily just need to be researchers. The experts can be members of the public, clinicians, really anyone who has a point of view, and also for it to be a platform for new voices. So we have had a lot of student contributors here, and a really great opportunity for students to get their point of view out, and again, a place for our readers to get informed opinions. So we do have an editorial model where people submit blogs, and those blogs are reviewed to make sure that everything is accurate, and that the tone and content fits with what we're interested in, that all conflicts of interest are declared, and that really that it fits with our mandate of providing an open and respectful debate and dialogue on healthcare. So you can, if the link is there to our guest post submission form, have a look. And just my last slide is just to give you a sense of what some of our readers have said, in particular about the blogs on Healthy Debate. And we found that the blogs have really generated a ton of interest and a ton of traffic on our site. People are really interested in reading about the opinions of others. So and we did do an evaluation study of Healthy Debate where we interviewed different stakeholder groups. So we interviewed decision makers, clinicians, journalists, and members of the public, and I have quotes from a couple of those stakeholder groups about the opinion section, so that they've helped broaden the appreciation for particular issues. That comes from a decision maker, that they balance some of the main articles with opinions and give a perspective where you can kind of see the objective and subjective points of an issue. That comes from a clinician. One decision maker described it as a forum that didn't exist previously. And finally, smart talk coming out of smart people, and a journalist saying that some of these contributors to the opinion section became a source. So that, again, really backs up the argument that you can use your blog as a platform to access people like journalists to get the word out. So with that, I'm going to pass the mic over to Jeremy, and we'll look forward to everyone's questions at the end. Thank you.
Hi there, everybody. One thing I'll add, actually, just coming off this nice page of quotes, is that just the other day we heard from one researcher who recently published on a blog on Healthy Debate, and he's had over 300 peer-reviewed publications over the last 30 years. And without really any humor, said that the Healthy Debate post he wrote, actually, he believed had more impact than the 300 articles that he had published over the years. And that was in reference to the fact that this was the first time that a deputy minister has read his work directly, as opposed to perhaps hearing about it through some policy brief some morning, but that he was able to actually directly access decision makers, and was enormously excited by that. And you know, you think a little bit too, I just want to say about the numbers that you get. You know, I think there's estimates to say about 50% of published material that's published in peer-reviewed journals is never read by anyone at all. And contrast that with your average Healthy Debate piece that receives at least 500 views. And many of them wind up having several thousand views within the first month or two that they're published. So that gives you a little bit of a sense of why you might want to get involved in this. Is just the reach is so much greater. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, as Karen said, I edit the opinion section for Healthy Debate. And so I've edited over 200 of these blogs now. And by edited, I mean selected them. We only have about I would say about a 30% rejection rate. So we, you know, most of the blogs that we receive, we do end up publishing. But frequently we find that a lot of folks, whether they're from clinical backgrounds or the public or researchers, haven't really written in this kind of thing before, and so they need a little bit of help getting their ideas into publishable formats. So one of the things about our model is that we offer editorial support. So I've just assembled here 5 tips. I'm happy to discuss other ideas in the question and answer period, or delve into these 5 more in depth. But I would say that these are probably the 5 things I tell people who submit to Healthy Debate most often, the 5 revisions I ask for most often. So the first one is know your audience. So let's talk a little bit about that. Karen, if you don't mind. All right, so think about your audience. The audience for an op-ed or blog is very different than that for an academic paper. Even if you're writing to other academics, what they're looking for in a blog is really very different than what they're looking for in a peer-reviewed piece. But more often than not, you're going to be blogging to access people who aren't your peers. And so you've got to think about what the general public or a policymaker want to know about your research. You know, they don't necessarily want to know, for example, a great deal about your methodology. Even though we are, as researchers, all think methodology is enormously important. Methodology is really not something you wind up talking about in a blog that you're going to address to a policymaker or to the general public. And you also need to think a lot about what approach would a member of the public find most engaging and convincing. You know, sometimes, you know, some people are going to be most engaged or convinced by, you know, exhaustive review of the literature that shows that your position or your thesis is incredibly well established in the scientific literature. But other people, and I think this is particularly true of the public, are going to be most engaged and convinced if you can make the issue real for them. In some way, let them know how it affects their lives. And sometimes the best way to do that is through, for example, an anecdote of a patient or somebody like that. We'll get to that. That's actually, I think, the 5th tip I've got for you, is how to kind of expand that. But really think about your audience. And Karen touched on this a little bit as well earlier on when she talked about the different platforms that are available. Which platform you choose to write in should shape, because different audiences read different platforms, so that should shape a little bit your approach. If you're writing for the Huffington Post, I think you're going to be a little bit more, your approach should be a little bit more populist, a little bit more oriented for the general public. If you're publishing on the Incidental Economist, you should recognize that you're going to be getting a lot of policy wonks, and so your voice is going to need to be a little different, and your whole piece is going to be tailored a little differently. So really the next 4 tips are really just sub-tips from this one, so we'll move through and see hopefully what I mean. So one of the most important things you can do is to really hook your readers. I mean, you need to think about why is there's so much out there. There's so many newspapers. There's so many blogs. Why should somebody take the time out of their busy day to read your blog? And so right off the bat, you need to grab your reader's attention with something powerful or intriguing. And this is most important for the first paragraph, but of course it's not just about the first paragraph. You want your reader to read all the way to the end of your blog. So throughout the whole thing, you need to think about what's going to make it most engaging. So I have here a couple of examples that you can read. I'll read them really quickly. And these are just 3 kind of random examples from the last 2 months of blogs that I think are just really good, really capture this. So one from Tim Caulfield: sadly, the creep of pseudoscience is manifested in the provincial legitimization of unproven alternative approaches to health continues, right? It's sort of provocative, it's powerful. Same way with Leonie Friedhoff's. I won't read the whole thing, but essentially calling out the Heart and Stroke Foundation, a reasonably respected organization, and basically saying they're harming Canadian children. There's no mystery novel here. You don't know where, you're not wondering where Yoni's blog is going to go. You know right from the beginning, and you're engaged. And likewise, Michael Law's comment here, very provocative. Want to buy a $100 coffee? Sounds absurd, doesn't it? But it's equally absurd that this is how much more Albertans pay for some generic drugs than people in other countries. And those are ways to just really immediately hook your audience. There's 2 classic, these are the most common beginnings for blogs that I immediately delete and ask people to rewrite. I recently read a report from the Health Council. I recently attended a conference or heard a speaker say those are not good ways to kind of engage your audience. Even if it's true that that's what got you thinking about an issue and wanting to write about it, the audience doesn't need to know about it. They need to know why they should care. So be thinking about that as you're introing, and then think about it throughout your blog. Another really important thing, and a really difficult one for scientists to get their heads around, and I admit I struggle with this when I write my own blogs. It's best, don't try to cover too much. Healthcare issues are complex, but with 500 to 700 words here, you have to make your focus razor sharp. So one idea, one op-ed. If you try to cover too many issues, you almost always come across as superficial or scattered. Just develop one thesis very, very clearly, and if you have lots of ideas about a specific subject, it just means you need to write more op-eds or blogs. And I know that sometimes there's going to be a really complex topic where you're like, well, it's say something about the social determinants of poverty and the importance of, or social determinants of health. And you think, well, there's all these different social determinants. I really need to kind of give a nuanced description. Really, that's not a good idea. You need to pick out a single issue and discuss it clearly. You can give a little hat tip to the fact that it's a complicated issue. One line that says, look, I acknowledge it's more complicated. It's not just one factor driving these poor health outcomes, but here's what I think is a factor we need to be talking about, paying attention to, and to make sure that that is the focus of your blog. Don't go off in 100 different directions. Now, and this is plain language is essential. If you're going to write in academic jargon, write for the peer-reviewed press. And this goes against our whole training. Academic and technical training prepares you to write for other academics and technicians, but you really need to acknowledge that when you step out to write for a wider audience, you have to simplify your vocabulary, you've got to eliminate jargon, and you have to simplify your sentence structure. Jargon and acronyms are 2 of the most difficult because in healthcare we tend to use these as second nature. Whether you're an epidemiologist and you're talking, or a health economist rather, and you're talking about qualities, or you're talking about health policy and you make some reference to the CMA, you need to acknowledge that people just don't know what those acronyms mean. They won't know what the technical jargon means. So you've got to think right in plain language. And that's not the same as dumbing your ideas down. The ideas need to stay complex. You're just making them more accessible. So our goal with Healthy Debate, and I don't claim that we always nail this, but we aim for a grade 8 reading level. And that's more basic than you would realize. You need to aim for very short sentences. Just as some general rules of thumb, don't use semicolons. Don't say with one long sentence what you could say with 2 shorter ones. And as I said before, eliminate technical jargon and acronyms. They're second nature to you, but they're mystifying for most other people. And really go for simple vocabulary. Don't use obscure words when simple ones will do the job. write in a most plain language. And this is, of course, extra important when you're writing an op-ed for the newspaper. The fastest way to get yourself rejected from the newspaper is to write at anything really above about a grade 8 or grade 10 reading level. And now this is, I think, one of the most, this is just my sort of reflections on the most powerful blogs that we've printed with Healthy Debate, is that the best ones have seemed to me to blend the personal and the scientific. So while individual anecdotes are anathema to the scientific method, the reality is that most of us actually find them more convincing than scientific evidence. Actually, that's true, I think, even of some of us who are trained scientists. And now that doesn't mean that you can't present the science, but often what I've found is the strongest blogs let your personality come through or use an anecdote in order to illustrate the evidence. To bring the evidence alive, to make people feel like they should care about what the evidence has to say. And so I've got a couple of examples here that I thought were particularly adept, again, from a fairly recent Healthy Debate post. So one of them is from Ritika Goel, who was writing about the social determinants of health, and specifically around the importance of raising the minimum wage. This was also a very newsy topic. The blog was timed to coincide with the campaign to raise the minimum wage here in Ontario. And what's so interesting about, or effective about how Ritika approached this is that much of the piece is actually talking about the social determinants of health and talking about the science and the evidence, using hyperlinks to kind of link people to the evidence. But she makes us care about the science by introducing this anecdote about Raj, a middle-aged South Asian man who's been really struggling and whose health is suffering because of basically earning too little. And this was an enormously successful and actually quite influential blog when it came out. And then another example, and this one actually from, again, somebody from the research community, Farah Schwartz, she really personalizes this vague concept of health literacy. I mean, we hear about health literacy all the time, but it's not a concept that I think would make any sense to the general public, or not really, or at least they wouldn't know what she was talking about. But here she illustrates it beautifully in this first paragraph of her blog with a really compelling anecdote. And notice that this is, in my view, something that functions, it captures a couple of the rules that I've told you about. First off, it's a hook. It gives you an anecdote about somebody that, pretty instantly you kind of care about this situation, right? A 2-year-old daughter who's got a fever, and you instantly connect. But then it also shows why health literacy matters so much by showing that really that it would have been incredibly easy for this woman to misdose her child with a medication that actually can be pretty dangerous if not dosed correctly. So those in my view are some of the sort of really overview of the most common comments I give back to writers when they come to me with an early draft. And I think if you think about those 5 tips as you're writing, as you're drafting, I think you'll have a very effective blog. So anyway, I think we're ready to kind of turn it back to questions and have an open discussion about how you can make blogging an effective part of your research practice.
Okay, great. Great, thanks Karen and Jeremy for that excellent presentation. So we've come to the question and answer period, and you have 2 options to ask a question. You can raise your hand by using the icon on the left of your side of your participant panel. Click on raise your hand and I will unmute you. If your hand is raised, it does mean that you want to ask a question via audio. Please be sure that you unraise your hand if you do not want to ask a question or don't intend to ask one. The other option, if you'd prefer to write in your questions, you can do so using the question box on the control panel. We don't have any questions coming in right now through the question box, but if you want to ask a question, please go ahead now and type in your question. Otherwise, I'll go straight to see if anyone's raised their hand to ask a question. I don't see any yet, so maybe I'll start. Oh, there's one question come in so far. Okay. So there's a question from Jessica Tatlow. She wants to know, could you talk a little bit about writing blogs for healthcare professionals instead of the public?
That's a great question, and I think many of the rules of thumb still apply because I think healthcare professionals, when they're looking at a blog, are expecting something different than what they would read in the peer-reviewed literature. So many of the same rules still apply. You want it to be short, you want the message to be really clear up front, and you want it to have a really clear kind of thesis and idea. And so the platform for that might be a little bit different than the platform for the public, but I would say that the overall format and style would be the same. Probably the use of anecdote, you could tone that down a little bit, although the truth is I think often, you know, in Kevin MD, which tends to have a wide healthcare professional audience, they often do use a patient case or patient story to illustrate what the point of view is. So I would say that many of the rules of thumb still apply. Jeremy, I don't know if you'd have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think anecdotes actually still have a really important role in clinical medicine, you know, as in terms of, you know, you might call it a case study instead of an anecdote, but, you know, I think that is still plays a really important role for kind of illustrating things or capturing issues that you really want to bring to the fore. And I certainly notice that actually our clinicians who blog for us are often generate some of the strongest anecdotes. I think one of the things is if you know that you're blogging and that your blog is going to be almost exclusively read by other clinicians, then I think that some of the rules around plain language can be sort of put on hold, specifically the ones around jargon. But I think actually it's still a really good practice when writing for others to keep to the grade 8 rating level. The easier that you make your, the clearer, because I find the grade 8 reading level, what it forces you to do is be exceptionally clear. You know, I think if you get into some of the more complicated sentence structures, you've got parentheses, sort of clauses, you've got semicolons, you know, advanced sentences with many clauses. The opportunity for confusion just multiplies with the more complex you make your language. So stripping down your writing style to make it kind of as clear as possible is always a good practice when trying to get your ideas out. But you know, again, if you're writing it for an audience that's primarily clinicians, then by all means, you know, use acronyms like COPD or CHF or something like that. I don't think that's a big deal.
Okay, great. Sylvia asks, I would like the speakers to explain what is an op-ed.
Oh, sure, I'll take that. So an op-ed is basically, I think the main distinction would be that an op-ed is something you write for an established newspaper, one that usually has a print section. And the term op-ed is because the last page of the first section of a paper traditionally is where the editorials are written, and the editorials are written by people who work for the newspaper. And then the page opposite that is where they would have guest content, and hence op-ed opposite the editorials.
I just add to that these days, you know, there's very few traditional newspapers are doing very well. Websites like the Huffington Post, I'll just pull it up here on my browser. Here's the Huffington Post, has a column. Here, sorry, just pull it up. It says featured blog post. So this is kind of the web version of that op-ed, where they have individuals who are not part of the editorial of the newspaper of the website who are submitting in their points of view, often on the content. So as you can see, even from these top two featured blog posts, they're quite relevant to what's happening in the news, but they're submitted from non-newspaper, non-journalists.
Okay, great, thank you. Laura asks, could you talk about how to respond or if to respond to any online comments posted in response to your own blog?
Well, that's a great question, and on Healthy Debate, we do have an open comments policy. We allow anyone who wants to submit a comment, and they are moderated, but generally, I would say, 99% of the comments are posted and non-edited and non-moderated. And I think it depends on the kind of comment that you get. Often with Healthy Debate, we do get people just expressing their point of view on a particular topic that our articles or our blogs have covered. And what we really like to have is, because we're trying to stimulate debate, we often will wait and see if others will respond to that comment and really get a great conversation going. Ritika Goel's blog on the minimum wage is a great example of that, where there was just a very rich interactive debate happening in the comment section of her piece, and Ritika, as a writer, actually stayed out of it and just let the conversation happening. When we do tend to respond to comments, there'll often be comments of clarification about the content of an article or a blog. So someone saying that you have the data wrong, someone asking a question particularly about a source or about a reference. And then in that case, we do respond, or if someone asks a question related to the particular topic. So, I would try to point them to a guideline that we referenced, or some material that we've referenced in it if they're asking a really specific question.
Carlo, this is a question for Jeremy. Oh, sorry, do you have something to add, Jeremy?
Yeah, sorry, I just had myself muted and didn't realize it. So the one thing I just wanted to add to that is that you do have to be very careful. Some of our commentators or some of our writers do engage, and you have to be very selective about the comments you're gonna respond to, because half the time, the internet is full of what they call trolls. People who are sitting in comment sections making, sort of trying to bait an argument, and it's really important to not. The term on the internet is "don't feed the trolls," and don't get kind of dragged down into the muck of an argument. If it looks like somebody is engaging you and trying to engage you in a really honest, open sort of discussion, then by all means consider participating. But just it's best to just ignore people who look like they're trying to bait you into an argument.
Sorry, this is the question that's having many answers. I just want to jump in and add one more thing. I did allude to it, but we haven't really touched on it, which is that blogs tend to be a platform to wider social media dissemination, and often comments on an article or on a blog post aren't just happening on the particular page where you've posted your piece, but they're happening on Twitter, they're happening on Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever social network you have shared your piece on. So there's many different ways to engage, and often for a really provocative piece, I think that the web etiquette is not that the writer is expected to respond to everything. I mean, you've put your opinion out there, and people are engaging with it, and how you choose to respond is really up to you and your level of engagement on various platforms, on the blog itself or in social media. I think depends on the tone of the comments, the type of conversation, and the type of engagement that you're trying to that you're really trying to stimulate with the content. So lots of different options here.
Great. Carlo has a question for Jeremy. Jeremy stated that 70% of works in peer-reviewed journals are not read by anyone at all. Do you have a reference for that statistic?
I think it's 50% is the number I remember. It was a paper. Sorry, I'm getting some feedback. That's I don't have the reference handy, but it's out there. What was it? Was it Nature or Science? One of the big scientific journals came up with that figure. I think they looked at two things. They used stats to try and estimate two figures. One for how many are never cited and how many are never read. So anyway, you'll have to look it up. I think it's either in Science or Nature.
Yeah, we could try to dig that up for them, and I'll send that out to the group. And there's a question from Jessica. When trying to hook my readers, who are the healthcare community, I often struggle coming up with provocative statements. Specifically, I worry about being too strong in my statements and alienating readers. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, so this is obviously a really tough thing for us researchers to kind of put ourselves out there. And I think one of the biggest tips I have is to recognize that what you're doing when you're writing out to the public is a fundamentally different exercise than when you're writing for your peers. And when you're going and going to write an op-ed or something like that, you are taking on the role of the public intellectual. And your job is not necessarily to make kind of the timid statements that us researchers, timid's unfair, you know, the cautious statements that us researchers tend to make. Because in the public sphere, that will be perceived often as undermining your own credibility. You know, in the public sphere, when you take on the mantle of the public intellectual, you really do need to speak with a fair bit of confidence. And not everyone, I think you also have to get comfortable with the idea that everyone, you will always find somebody that will disagree with you. And those people often are actually already alienated. You know, I think you hear some number about, you know, 10% will always be with you, 10% will always be against you, and you're now trying to capture the minds of the 80% between the two of them when you engage in something like this. So I think with provocative statements, you just need to, I mean, obviously don't make wildly crazy statements, but don't get too worried about that sort of 10 or 20% that will always be against you. You know, those folks are going to disagree with you no matter what you say. And so you have to think about how you're projecting credibility and confidence to the others who you are trying to sway. And I think, you know, I think that's where making strong statements of being confident really, really matter.
That's great. We don't have any other written-in questions. If anyone has a question they would like to ask, please feel free to write them in or raise your hand, and you can ask your question audially. So I have Sanjesh asking Karen, you touched upon anti-vaccine campaigns, and if health professionals or researchers are not engaging in the online discussion, then these views result in uninformed content. In the case of anti-vaccination campaigns, previously controlled diseases are re-emerging within Canada. Should we refute such campaigns with the same vigor?
So that's a great question, and I'm glad that you've brought it up. We do have a blog on Healthy Debate that was written by, sorry, I'm trying to get my browser here. We do have a blog written on Healthy Debate by a pediatrician that is titled A Pediatrician's Plea to the Anti-Vaccinationists. And as you can imagine, this is, you know, this drew quite a lot of traffic. You can see it now on my screen. And he really did, I think, take some of the pieces that the anti-vaccine community uses and flip them on their heads. So as Jeremy did mention, I mean, anecdotes are king on the web, and particularly for some of these non-evidence-based movements. So he used an anecdote here of someone who, you know, who died from chicken pox, and you know, really, really powerful anecdote from that person. So, you know, as a clinician, he didn't just use data and statistics to counter that. He, again, used a really emotional anecdote to reach out to people. And what Dan did, which was really interesting, and again, going back to the comments, as you can see, there were 37 comments here, and he had people who responded to him and, you know, talked about things that were inaccurate. For example, this comment from Rita, you know, she talks about mercury content in some of these flu shots, and Dan was right there to answer her back. And so, you know, he did really use the same level of engagement and some of the same almost techniques that the anti-vaccination advocates use to respond to these comments. So you can see here, you know, Dan's having this whole conversation with Rita. I mean, that takes a great deal of commitment. That takes a lot of time, but certainly, you know, as an expert and as a clinician who's seeing this in his practice, he took this on and was quite committed to it. And you know, it does take a bit, a great deal of time, I would say, to respond to all those comments. But I think his blog itself reveals a number of interesting strategies where he's, using the same kind of anecdotes and examples that some of these advocacy, non-evidence-based groups use to counter some of their arguments. I don't know if I've answered the question. Anything else? Is there anything else you wanted to ask?
Sorry, Laura has a question. Could you tell us more about the benefits of writing op-eds? Is there often financial payment? Do scientists usually add these to their CVs?
So at one time there was financial payments associated with some op-ed writing. These days, newspapers are hurting so badly that often they can't afford to pay, and people are doing it mainly for the exposure. That's not always true. Certainly, invited op-eds, for example, I think one of the Healthy Debates editors, Timothy Caulfield, just wrote a piece in the Globe and Mail last night, or yesterday, about the genetic test, the new genetic test for Alzheimer's disease. That is actually, I haven't asked him, but that kind of piece still tends to be paid when it's an invited piece, as opposed to something where you go to the Globe and Mail and say, I have this great piece, would you publish it? Less and less are those pieces paid.
And just with regards to the question about the CV, we do have Irfan Dalla, who's a member of our editorial board and who's been pretty outspoken on a number of different issues, written op-eds in the Globe and Mail, and as well has blogged on Healthy Debate, has told me that he has his Healthy Debate articles and blogs on his CV. So depends how long you want your CV to be, but certainly it's not bad practice to include these on your CV.
And I'd probably add, because I work in the private sector at a think tank, and when we are trying to invite or find academics who might want to speak on a specific topic for our conferences or meetings, we do look at whether or not they can write or communicate in a way that is that can be disseminated to the broader population or the public. So I think showing that you've written op-eds or you've done sort of presentations among different non-academic groups, that definitely is a benefit for different employers as well. We have a question from Hawa. Hi, great presentation. Can you talk about the use of Twitter as an effective microblogging platform, maintenance, etc., beyond acting as another vehicle to support a traditional blog?
Sure. So that's a great question, and I love Twitter. Jeremy and I are both on Twitter, and if you click on our bios on Healthy Debate, you can follow us there. And I think Twitter is really, each social media platform has a different use. Twitter tends to be a place where insiders are gathering and sharing information. So, for example, on Twitter, I can reach out to Brian Goldman, who hosts a radio show on CBC White Coat Black Art. I can reach out to Andre Picard. I can reach out to a whole, slew of journalists and use that as a way to connect with them. In addition, I can reach out to various organizations today. For example, the Royal College is on Twitter. ISIS, which is a research institute in Ontario, is on Twitter. I mean, many healthcare organizations, many hospitals are now on Twitter. So it's a way of quick outreach and conversation with an insider group. Twitter tends to not be as good of a vehicle for reaching the public when our Healthy Debate content has gone viral and really had an impact with the public. It tends to be shared more through Facebook and through LinkedIn. Twitter tends to be a place to to access information and to access other experts.
Okay, great. Are there any final questions? I think we have time for one more if there is one. No, I think we're good for questions now. Jeremy and Karen, do you have any final last words or comments?
Yeah, absolutely. So just two things I tried. I don't know if I was successful, but I tried to share a link to a blog, I think it's actually a blog post, in the Washington Monthly that touches on the issue of people not reading academic papers. It's not the exact citation I was looking for, but it was what I was able to find. So for the participant that was wondering about that, hopefully you're able to see that in the dialogue window. Hopefully I shared it correctly. And then the other thing is I just hope that you guys will take what you've learned today and consider submitting blog posts and op-eds out to all the various sources we talked about, and especially Healthy Debate. You know, I look forward to reading your drafts.
Right. Well, thank you, Karen and Jeremy, and I just want to apologize for getting the website wrong. But it is healthydebate.ca, and we encourage you to go visit that site. Thank you, Karen and Jeremy, for delivering such an interesting and informative session. And on behalf of the CSEB, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. Please take the time to answer our evaluation survey, which you will be prompted to complete at the close of the webinar. The evaluation responses will help us improve our webinar and online course offerings to our members, as well as to the broader epidemiology and biostatistics community. And so with that, I'd like to wish you a pleasant afternoon. And if you also have very directed questions for Jeremy or Karen, email them at info@healthydebate.ca. Thanks very much, everyone.